Di annual meeting kali ini, isu perempuan menjadi salah satu pembahasan yang dianggap penting. Sebentar lagi, saya di ruangan ini akan memandu diskusi yang berbicara tentang empowering women in the workplace atau memberdayakan perempuan di tempat kerja. Akan hadir pembicara antara lain Managing Director IMF, Madam Christine Lagarde, Menteri Keuangan Sri Mulyani, dan juga Deputi Gubernur Senior Bank Sentral Kanada. Mereka adalah perempuan-perempuan pertama yang mengisi posisi ini. Good afternoon everybody. Welcome to Bali. Selamat datang di Bali. My name is Rosi and I'll be the moderators for today's panel. I'm so excited. Every time we discuss about this issue, I'm always excited. Today we are going to discuss about empowering women in the workplace. Before I start, let me begin with our hashtag today, that is Women for Growth. Please tweet your comment, photos, etc. regarding our discussion today. But I also want to remind you, please keep your cell phone on silent mode, please. I'm so honored to be on the stage with these extraordinary speakers. Let me begin with the one and only Managing Director of IMF, the one who needs no introduction, Madam Christine Lagarde. Always good to see you, ma'am. And actually, we keep the chairs vacant because that should be for Minister Sri Mulyani, but she's still in the meeting. She will be joining us at 2:30. She will join us for sure. And the next side is Vera Zongwi, UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of Economic Commission for Africa. Her left side is Ms. Priyanti Fernando. She is the Executive Director, International Women's Rights Action Watch, Asia Pacific. And last but not least, Senior Deputy Governor, Bank of Canada, Caroline Wilkins. The economic imperative for female empowerment and the policies that support its achievement are well known, such as boost economic growth, reduce income inequality, and strengthen economic resilience. But in fact, women are still marginalized. They are not represented enough in leadership position, not represented enough in policy decision making. Women are overrepresented in more routine job, which is easily replaced by technology. Recent work by the IMF has shown that gender diversity matters. Now we're going to discuss what's new in these findings. Let me begin with you, Madam Lagarde. You always believe that empowering women is very important in economic. What's new?
Okay, let me just backtrack for a second. What we have demonstrated clearly due to the very good work produced by the IMF is that contribution of women and reducing the gap that there is both in terms of labor participation and in terms of wages is good for the economy, is good for competitiveness, and is good morally. But we focus only on the economy, and we decided to go a little bit beyond these excellent general findings that adding women to the workforce, including women in the economy, is good for prosperity. Because what additional work produced just recently, and I'm just about to officially release this work, is that actually there is even more contribution by women than we had initially anticipated. And the value of that research is actually to go deep down into what specific contribution women bring to the economy, identifying that actually because of their differences, whether it's biological, whether it's cultural, whether it is by virtue of the tasks that we have often been associated with, we provide something that is different from what men provide. So men and women complement each other, and as a result cannot be actually substitute. And women bring about something different, something more, because it is different from what men would provide. In other words, if you were just to add one full-time equivalent worker, irrespective of gender, you would get plus. But if you bring about somebody who is not just a normal full-time equivalent, but somebody who is coming from a minority present in the workforce, i.e. a woman, then you get an additional upside as a result. So I think that's the key finding. It's that because of that complementarity between men and women, bringing in more women who are currently in more minority than men actually delivers more value than was initially considered. So it makes the case for bringing women to the workforce. That is the first big finding. There's another study that I will show you. This is just teasing here. There's another study that I will show you in a minute when you ask me about the future of work and the role of artificial intelligence, new technologies, and all the rest of it.
Digital,
but that one is really fascinating.
Okay, I'll get back to you soon. I'm going to Ms. Fernando. Sorry, Dr. Zoe. Tell us about your experience. Are there economic sectors that you see most likely to bring women into formal employment? If so, how can we promote these sectors given importance of gender diversity?
Thank you very much, and let me start first by thanking the International Monetary Fund, but in particular Madame Lagarde for having me here and the Economic Commission for Africa. I think that there is never enough women doing work around women and talking about the importance of women, so this is particularly important. And I think coming to your question, normally when we talk about women, there's always this tendency to say, what's the sector we should put them in? But I think as economists, we normally say we don't want to pick winners. We want to create the conditions for winners to emerge. And I think that's one of the powerful things about the report. It shows in some sense that if you start with the premise that it's important to get women into work and that women's employability is important, then the question becomes, what is it that you need to do to make that happen? And I think that the work that is in the report, some of the work that ECA has been doing around women, shows us, for example, that if you increase access to electricity, women, the employability of women goes up by almost 9%, and we have some work that we've done on this in South Africa. And that just by definition, getting women into work, it doesn't matter the sector, increases GDP in Tanzania by 2%, GDP in South Africa by 10%, GDP in Egypt, and if there are Egyptians here, by almost 34%.
To Ms. Fernando, I also like to hear from your experience, what are the biggest barriers to women's progression, and what role can the public and the private sectors play?
And if I was going to look at women's empowerment, I would kind of take a different tack on it. I would say that we would need to put women first. We need to look at women as people and as human beings, and while there are constraints maybe for the IMF to do this, I would think that just considering women as being mobilized for economic growth is insufficient. So my hashtag, for example, would not be women for growth, but would be growth for women. And I think that's a challenge I would like to put to the IMF, to think about a different way of looking at growth so that it would actually empower women. The other thing that I always feel a little uncomfortable about, and it could be because I'm not an economist, I'm a women's rights activist, is this assumption that women have to be somehow brought into the workforce. And it gives me the feeling that we think that women are not working. And I think if you walk around Bali or you walk around any city in the world, you don't see women sitting around having a beer and playing cards. I don't think that's the situation. I think women are working all the time. I think what we don't know as economists is how to count that work. That work is not being counted, both literally because it doesn't come into the statistics, and metaphorically because it is not valued. And I think that's really important because women are working in many sectors. Women are particularly working in the care economy, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, but women are also in the unpaid family labor, in informal employment, at the bottom of global value chains, in precarious jobs. And so in the care economy, and here are some numbers, somebody's calculated that 16.4 billion hours per day is spent on unpaid care work, which is like about 2 billion people working 8 hours per day without any money or any remuneration. In Asia Pacific, women spend 4 times more time on care work than men do. Another calculation is that if it's valued on the basis of a minimum wage, it would actually, care work could contribute to 9% of the global GDP.
All right, now to Ms. Wilkins, you are in top level management. Why do you think gender diversity is important in policy decision making?
I think it's instrumental because you can just imagine that what considerations are brought to the table, whether you're debating public policy generally or you're debating monetary policy, is going to be a reflection of who you are. And you're more likely to get that diversity of thought that is instrumental to sound decision making if you have a balance of men and women at the table, and diversity in other dimensions as well. And perhaps the best example is the one that you just provided, in a sense of how do you measure output, how do you measure GDP? You know, the people that decide are going to think about the things that we should value, and it's possible that men and women may value different things. When it comes to central banking, which is my business, it's also extremely important. There's a lot of studies out there that show how the share of women in governing council boards, so decision-making bodies, has increased over time, and that's fabulous. And it's allowed people to do studies to see whether or not, in fact, like Madame Lagarde said at the beginning, people think differently depending on their gender. And in fact, they find, yes, there's some studies that show that in fact, governing council boards that have more women tend to be a little more hawkish. That means they're more likely to want to increase rates.
What I'm going to ask you is what steps are being taken in Indonesia to increase female labor force participation? Any particular sectors? What are the challenges you see, both in terms of making policies and also you as the first female finance minister?
Wow, that's a very difficult question. Okay. I think first we recognize that for a country to be able to improve the work participation, labor participation, especially among women, it's going to be good for the economy, but good for the woman and good for the family. That's for sure. And Indonesia, it's been quite some time that the labor participation for women is low and not improving. There are a couple of things that we can identify as an obstacle for that. First, of course, if you can talk about the supply and demand. The supply side on the woman's side in this case, there are, although for Indonesian women to work outside the house, we are not finding a constraint in terms of prohibited or you are not allowed and all those but still this country is very paternalistic. So in a way that women being seen of more a secondary in terms of the income generating activity and being seen as a second priority for them to actually take or in charge for the family, that is like a norm. And that's why maybe first that we need to address the issue about this norm, that creating an obstacle for women to then work and be more confidence and participating in labor force. Second one, I think in terms of the nature of women, and this is also happened and I observe in many of my own experience when I work at the university, but now most importantly when I'm in Ministry of Finance. Many of the young women, when they enter the labor force, they're actually very excited. But then when they face with the real, what you call it, time dilemma, at least we count it time because we are all women and men, we only have 24 hours a day. So when they are getting married and have a family and then getting pregnant, everything suddenly it's become the burden of women. Especially it's become a burden of women because you have to carry baby, you are the one who pregnant, you are going to deliver, and then motherhood is always being seen as a woman job. And this is exactly then creating the burden for the woman to continue work while at the same time they have to carry the role as a mother. Without any support from policy, I think it's going to be very impossible. Many Indonesian family, if you are coming from middle upper class, you can afford to have a domestic worker to support you. But if it is not, it's really become a trade-off that's impossible for them to address. So for us, meaning that if you want to see the labor participation of women, you have to be able to reduce this trade-off or burden. And what kind of policy? In more established institutions, like in our institution, Ministry of Finance, is becoming now a best practice, mandatory, but even in this case, we have a championship for an office who provide a woman-friendly office. So you are providing childcare, you are going to have a breastfeeding room, all those things is being provided. It's not mandatory, but I make it as mandatory. As a, what you call it, affirmative. It's not mandatory, meaning it's not in the policy in this case, but we put it. So I visited in Medan. They are very, very proud because knowing that Ibu Menteri is going to visit. So they provide me with all the country visit and the office visit. And it's very lovely. They have a cafeteria in which they provide lunch. And then on the side of it is a playground for children below 5. And then also the breastfeeding room. I think this is going to at least creating less tension for the woman. The third is, I think some women also still feel that some of the occupation is being perceived as just a man job. For women, you really have to be an extraordinary to be able to enter this male-dominated job.
Untuk Bali itu nggak lagi membicarakan
satu
ada laki, tidak lagi laki dan perempuan.
Jadi gender diversity di masyarakat Bali itu sesungguhnya it's not an issue anymore.